Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
And welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. Good to have you with us today. First and foremost, thank you to everybody. Congratulations. We have hit 40,000 subscribers with the Bill Kelly Podcast, and it's just an incredible landmark for us, and we're so proud and so happy for that. But we use the old cliche, we couldn't have done it without you. So thank you, first of all, to the 40,000 people that have subscribed to the podcast so far. And thank you for all the congratulatory notes, too. It's really nice and heartening to hear from you. We've been at this a relatively short time compared to some of the other folks in the field, and we've made great strides, and we really do appreciate that because it's all about you and me and having that sort of dialogue. And on that line, 6 o'clock tonight, 6 o'clock Eastern time tonight, we're going to do a live stream and invite your comments about some of the news stories that we've been talking about. It's been a crazy week, news on both sides of the border, Canada and the U.S., and we'll give you a platform for that 6 p.m. Eastern time tonight for our live stream. Now, let me get into some of the news that has been making the headlines and some of the information and misinformation, I guess, that people are talking about. On this side of the border, first and foremost in Canada, the pipeline deal is what everybody seems to be talking about, and there's a lot of consternation in some circles, a lot of congratulatory hand clapping going on in the others. Let's try to sift through this here and try to give you exactly what the lay of the land is with this announcement. First of all, nobody's going to start breaking ground on a new pipeline tomorrow, okay? That's not happening. That's not what this whole thing was about. What the Prime Minister and the Alberta Premier signed earlier this week, I should say, was what they call a memorandum of understanding, okay? That just means here are the rules, here are the parameters, here are the guidelines, the guardrails. If a deal does come along, this is what has to be done. And it's pretty extensive as to what they agreed to here. And it is, I don't want to downplay this by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a landmark deal for a whole lot of reasons. As Alan Weary writes about on CBC, the Carney-Smith agreement surely won't make pipelines boring again. I don't know if they were ever boring, but they certainly are controversial in so many different ways, especially from past governments and what the Prime Minister has promised to try to do this time around. And again, I want to state that, this is just basically something that I think Alberta has been looking for the longest time. You know, and I know, and this goes back generations now, the hue and cry from a lot of people in Alberta has been, you know what, Ottawa doesn't give a damn about Alberta. They don't care about our economy. They don't care about the people here. They don't care about the way that some of the environmental policies of today and previous governments have had on the Alberta economy. And I think one of the messages that I think Prime Minister Carney has tried to signify to the people of Alberta is, yeah, we do care. Yes, we are listening. And the fact that Danielle Smith and Mark Carney can actually sit down and hammer out this memorandum of understanding is I think, monumental news, really, as to just how they're going to move forward on this. Now, we need to keep a couple of things in mind here, first of all. Despite what you hear from Premier Eby in British Columbia and some of the First Nations who have responded to this so far, there is no deal yet. This just means we're going to consult with everybody, but this is what we want to do. This is where we're heading, okay? But they want to find some common ground with the provinces that are impacted by this. They want to find some common ground with the First Nations people. There's not just a buy-in with this, but there's a partnership. And Prime Minister Carney's talked about this from day one. As a matter of fact, what I see here is a lot of the hue and cry, some of the consternation that some of these groups are talking about these days are the same voices and the same sort of concerns we heard when they talked about the big infrastructure bill back in the springtime. They're not going to just start bulldozers and start trampling all over everything. They're simply saying, this is what we want to do. Now, let's sit down and talk about how it might impact you, how you might be a part of the partnership that's going to happen here. There's a lot of work yet to do. Okay, and let's keep that in mind. Memorandum of understanding just means this is where we want to go. Let's talk about it with the partners, and there's obviously a lot of conversation yet to be had on this. And I think what's happening here is I think a step in the right direction, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later on in the podcast about the impact that a deal, should it come to fruition, could have on the Canadian economy. Now, I want to stay right up front. there are some people that just are not going to be on side with this. I mean, we've heard from some people. We've had people on this podcast in the last little while that have suggested that we don't need more pipelines, that, the whole idea of fossil fuels is probably starting to diminish. And, look at the Chinese economy and the way they're moving to alternative fuels and energy sources. And this is yesterday's news. Well, and there's an argument to be made for that. And that group has to be listened to. And I think they are being listened to. But 5-6 years ago, from one particular aspect of that, we were saying the same thing on the podcast and on our radio show back in those days, that, EVs are the future now. We won't be using fossil fuels. The gasoline-driven engines are on the way out. Well, something happened on the way down to that status that some people were suggesting we were heading toward. It slowed down for a variety of reasons: the economy, Donald Trump getting elected, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I wouldn't write fossil fuels off just yet. And the fact that the need is there, and that even the Asian markets that we're told are going to be the leaders in alternative energy sources are still at this point looking for fossil fuels. So that's part of the justification for what's going to be happening here. But the fact of the matter is this is going to be undertaken right now, and this is the way that's going to be. And there's an interesting piece in the article on CBC, if I could just highlight it. We've got it up on the screen for you right now. Perhaps Carney was not fond of the Trudeau approach to climate policy. Perhaps he believes that these sacrifices are a small price to pay for the sake of solidifying the industrial carbon price and undercutting the threat of national unity posed by an unhappy Alberta. And don't dismiss that as just a short little part of this. We talked earlier in a previous show about the separation movement that's going on in Alberta. It may not be strong, but it's vocal, and you don't want to see that grow. You want that nipped in the bud. Well, this commitment by the federal government and the cooperation between the federal government and Alberta government undercuts that separation. Yeah, we do. Ottawa does care. The rest of Canada does care about Alberta, and we're better together than we are apart. That seems to be the message. So it's by moving the ability of anybody to seriously claim the federal government is a significant obstacle to the pipeline, Carney has not completely removed himself from the question of whether a pipeline gets built. The memorandum describes a new pipeline as a priority and pledges federal involvement in a trilateral discussion involving the BC government and BC First Nations. Now, this is an important part of this, and I want to underscore this. Unless or until a private sector proponent steps forward to say they would like to build a pipeline, such commitments might even be moot. What if a private sector proponent steps forward in discussions with the BC government and First Nations fail to produce broad acceptance for a pipeline? So that's up in the air right now. And as we mentioned, Premier David Eby, who is the aggrieved Premier of BC, has already said that pushing for an oil pipeline right now could cause the First Nations to withdraw support from existing liquid natural gas projects that they have in the province. That's at this stage something that needs to be discussed. In other words, nobody has said that's going to happen. And, okay, maybe you need to put that stuff on the table. But what the federal government is saying here, what the Prime Minister is saying, and even what Danielle Smith is saying, is, yeah, okay, those are concerns. Let's sit down and talk about this. And how can we assuage some of those concerns? How can we bring people on side? And oftentimes, the reason that some of these concerns come forward and some of these things really gain a lot of steam is because they're speculative. Let's deal with facts here as to which way they want to go. Now, one of the offshoots of this whole thing that we talked about here already, of course, is one cabinet minister in the Carney government has resigned as a result of that. Stephen Guilbeault, who used to be the environment minister for the Trudeau government, but was still in cabinet for the Carney government, has decided to retire from cabinet. He's resigning from cabinet. And that's an important distinction here. He's not leaving the party. He's not quitting the Liberal caucus. He's just resigning his position in cabinet because obviously he disagrees with this. Guilbeault has always been some of a radical in some people's minds, although he would suggest that he's kind of in the middle when it comes to environmental issues. Is that his decision to run as a Liberal candidate in 2019 was most remarkable. He was doing that right after the Trudeau government decided to build the Trans Mountain pipeline, an expansion of the TMX project. And the environmentalist was joining a government that was actively building a pipeline, but he joined them anyway, for whatever his reasons were. So what does his exit from cabinet mean? Well, maybe not a whole lot. I was personally, I was surprised that Carney even included Guilbeault in his cabinet when he made those announcements a few months ago. He is still going to sit as a Liberal MP, though. He'll obviously not be supportive of a project like this, but he's still going to be there. So let's not start any of the rumors now about, the government's going to fall now because they've lost another member. Doesn't happen. It's not going to happen. So this is not the end of the discussions, as they used to say. This is not even the end of the beginning. There's still a lot of stuff to come here. But the fact that the Alberta government rather, and the federal government have sat down here and shaken hands on a memorandum of understanding is big news, because that hasn't happened. Certainly didn't happen during the Trudeau years, did it? And the fact that it's happening here is monumental. Now, why are we doing this? Well, first of all, the Prime Minister's talked about this from day one, and it's no secret that Danielle Smith has wanted this pipeline deal to go through at the same time. So there's a conglomeration of concepts here and visions as to how they want to move the Canadian economy forward. And on that note, some good news about the Canadian economy came out today, too. We're not in a recession. And I know that Paulie and a bunch of the other naysayers have been wringing their hands and saying, we're going down the dumper, things are terrible. The economy grew at an annualized rate of 2.6% in the third quarter. Stats Canada released these details on Friday. So the fact that we grew and we have not had those consecutive areas of downward growth indicates that this boost in the third quarter has avoided a technical recession. All right, this is according to the CBC article that we've got up on the screen here right now. And there's some reasons why, and I want to touch on those for just a couple of seconds. The Canadian economy grew at a rate of 2.6% in the third quarter, Stats Canada says, avoiding this recession. I know a lot of the time we're going to throw numbers at you, and you're going to get economists all over the TV news about this and online, and you're going to say, I don't understand all these statistics. Well, the short part of it is here. Government spending on weapons is up by 82% in the third quarter. Remember, they said there's a commitment here to our NATO commitments, etc. That creates jobs. That creates the economy. That infuses activity in the economy. That led to stronger than anticipated growth, along with an uptick in crude oil exports. Ottawa is pledged, along with other NATO countries, of course, to spend 5% on GDP by 2035. And already we're seeing a positive impact on the economy. There was also more government spending on non-residential structures, things like hospitals. However, this is an important part. Business investment was virtually unchanged in the third quarter, according to StatsCan, and household spending declined as fewer purchased things like cars, but spent more in financial services and things of this nature. In other words, we don't want to buy big-ticket items right now because a lot of us are still not sure about the economy. And that's only going to come, consumer confidence, I guess, is what we're talking about here. That's only going to come with more and more good news. But this is good news. And it's not time to start popping champagne corks and say, hey, happy days are here again. The worst is over. But we are trending upwards, and that's the positive news out of this thing, which indicates that some of the policies the government has already enacted are starting to have a very positive impact on the economy. And I know. You're going to say, well, look, it's not impacting me. It's not yet. It's not. I get that. But we have to look at what's happening here and look for trends here, okay? Technical recession, of course, is when you have two consecutive quarters of negative growth, and the third quarter shows that we didn't get that. So here's Doug Porter now from Bank of Montreal, rather. He says, even so, we are significantly changing our forward outlook on the economy, and we'll stick with expected growth rate of 1.4% in next year. So what this has done here, as he mentions earlier in the piece here, is with the fact that we've avoided the recession is good news. The fact that their projections and the government's projections for growth are actually being exceeded now by this. Now, it's not all sunshine and roses here. Andrew de Capua, who's an economist with the Chamber of Commerce, Canadian Chamber of Commerce, says that we still need strong domestic demand to carry more of the load. It simply wasn't there in the third quarter. And households and businesses are still holding back, and the economy hasn't found the momentum it needs. So that's an important point that he makes here, is that, yes, we're trending positively, and that's good. But what we also need to consider here is what's happening domestically. And to that end, the Carney government has already made some moves about that I want to talk about, too, especially when it comes to the steel and lumber industry. And that's a very positive story here that we need to talk about how Canadian businesses are actually going to be investing in Canada, okay? And that's an important part of this. We talk about the greater picture here by talking about what's happening on a national basis and the fact that the economic numbers are starting to look better. But let's talk about some of the drivers. One of the things that has concerned many Canadians, and justifiably so, are the tariffs on steel, aluminum, and lumber over the last little while and the impact that's having on the economy. steel industry, where I come from in Hamilton, is a major factor in this. But of course, it's not just Hamilton. It's Sault Ste. Marie. The steel industry is located all over the country in various forms because of the steel byproducts and things of that nature. So this is important. And of course, the lumber industry, although a lot of us might simply say, well, that's BC. No, it's not. It's something that's going on in other parts of the country too, in the maritime provinces and here in Ontario. Lumber is still a major contributor to the Canadian economy. And what we found here now is that there have been some moves made by the Carney government in the last couple of days to try to shore that up. No, we don't have a deal yet with the United States. And let's get that off the table right now, because I think many Canadians, most Canadians, according to the polling we've seen, are on side with the idea that, look, a no deal is better than a bad deal. But we can do things here. We're not just going to sit here, and our government's not just sitting there saying, well, we'll just wait until the Americans get back to us. We have to make some moves on our own, and they've done that with the steel industry. The Prime Minister has announced new measures to help steel and lumber producers for fresh markets from goods within Canada. Key part, within Canada. Tighter quotas on foreign steel entering Canada is going to be a big part of this. Now, speaking about this is the Canadian Steel Producers Association CEO. Her name is Catherine Cobden, and she had some interesting comments about this. She says there is a global oversupply of steel, which limits Canada's ability to export steel to new overseas markets. It's one thing for us to say we want to find more export markets, and that's a great idea. But if there's an oversupply, prices suck. The price goes down. Or they simply say, great product you got there, Canada, but you know what? We don't need it right now. Sorry, things have slowed down a little bit. So she says that sharper quota restrictions on new tariffs targeting steel will help protect the market here at home. So let's talk about that for a second, because this is something that the Prime Minister has mentioned, and I think it's an important part of what we're talking about here for our overall recovery program. Quotas in place is something they're all doing. But here's what's going on here. We want to build in this country. Let me tie this back to what we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, the possibility of a pipeline deal. Let's use Canadian product for that, right? And I want to go back here right now to see just to how this can actually manifest itself. We'll get onto this paragraph here right near the bottom of the page. It says, Canadian steel producers already make 80% of the various types of steel products that Canada imported last year. You get that? In other words, the product that the people that are building in this country need, 80% of it's already being made here, but they're still buying American. Why? I don't get that. And the government is basically trying to encourage these people to say, hey, buy Canadian. It's one thing for you and me to buy Canadian, right? If we're going to Walmart or we're going to the grocery store or we're going to wherever we're going, it's buy the Canadian product. That helps support the Canadian economy. But what's happening here, according to these statistics and according to Catherine Cobden from the steel producers, is businesses and people that are building are not buying Canadian as much as they should be. And the product is being made here. It's not as if they have to transition and say, well, I guess we're going to have to settle for Canadian steel. It's a good product. And I don't know if it's just old habits or whatever the situation is, but we've got to break that habit. We've got to get the people that are building, whether it's pipelines or buildings or whatever the case might be, to start using Canadian steel. That will increase production. That will increase job growth here. That will make the steel industry more viable in this country. And we don't need to look outside. Economies are all cyclical, right? Like we just said, now there's a glut of international steel. So maybe our export business with steel is not going to be as strong as it could be or should be. But it'll come back. It always does. And in the meantime, though, we need to do what we're doing at home. We got to look after ourselves here at home. And we are building. That's what the economy is saying here, is that we start building big things. Carney has talked about building big things, port reconstructions and pipelines or whatever else that's going to be going on, nuclear plants and of course, the ring of fire developments and things of that nature. Canadian steel must be used for these things, and it can be, and that's going to help that sector, which has been suffering. Same thing with lumber. Start using Canadian lumber. It's a superior product anyway. We've got to get out of this habit of leaning, and maybe that's one of the downsides. If you look at free trade deals too often, there's maybe people are simply saying, well, you know what, right now maybe the American lumber is a better deal. It's not anymore because of the tariff situation. So we got to get that out of our head. And the manufacturers are telling the people that are doing the building these days, start using our product. And if that happens, and according to what the article is saying here, that is starting to happen right now, that's only going to help us in the long run. So the takeaway here is simply this, is that, look at, we're on the right track here. Yes, it's going to be slow, but we told you from the get-go here that things are going to be slow. Yes, Alberta and the federal government have actually reached a memorandum of agreement about building another pipeline. Still a long way to go. There has to be a private sector buy into this, and nobody's jumped forward saying, hey, we'll jump on side here. Hopefully that's going to happen sooner than later, but it hasn't happened yet. Yes, there's going to be a lot more negotiation and consultation with First Nations groups as partners in this, and with the BC government. Clearly, the Alberta government and the Saskatchewan government and even the Manitoba government are on side with this proposal. They think it's a fabulous idea. But and I don't think we're ever going to find unanimity in this, but the fact is we can find a consensus to move forward on this and start using Canadian products for the construction of said projects, whether it's pipelines or anything else. But the fact is that we seem to be getting a little bit better, and we seem to be we're not outperforming or overperforming here. I think we're just simply performing better than we had thought we were going to at this stage. But, make no mistake about it, we have a long way to go. And you and me, as consumers, still have a role to play here about buying Canadian and about supporting Canadian businesses. That's so very important for us to do that now. Yes, we have to look globally. We have to look outside here. But when things slow down, as they seem to have now on the global markets, we can do it ourselves. I mean, there are some industries that we simply can't. We as Canadians, we can't buy enough cars to self-sustain an auto industry in this country. We need to export those, and that's going to be a problem. And, that's why the negotiations are going to be continuing between Canada and the U.S. and other countries about that. But when it comes to things like steel and lumber and aluminum, for that matter, we can do a lot better for ourselves right within our own country. And I think that's the message from here. So, again, we got a long way to go. This is not a one-way deal here either. I mean, the Alberta government has made some concessions towards some environmental issues that, quite frankly, a lot of people didn't think were going to happen. So the devil will be in the details, right? As it always is in deals like this. And so there's a lot to be hammered out here. But the fact is they're still at the table. There's still a memorandum of understanding saying, yeah, that's the way we want to go now. Now let's sit down and talk about the people that are going to be partners in this. And until we get a clearer picture as to how First Nations are going to be involved in this, what are the impacts going to be environmentally and, of course, economically, and the same thing with the BC government. Let's just keep our fingers crossed that we're going in the right direction and that we're going to find some consensus on this in the next little while. It's a good news day, all right? It's, as we say, we're not where we want to be right now, but at least we've turned the ship around and we seem to be starting to move in the right direction. And that's a good thing, as Martha Stewart would say. That's it for this edition of the podcast. Thanks, as always, for being with us. If you're on YouTube, great to have you with us. Don't forget to hit that notification bell to pass it along. And as we mentioned, thank you once again to the 40,000 subscribers. And that's a benchmark that we're so proud of. We want to keep on going, though. The more subscriptions we get, the more support we get, the more we can do this job and create the dialogue back and forth that you apparently are really enjoying. And so are we, frankly, by supplying it with you. Thank you to Madeline Kelly for the great work that she does in producing this. Don't forget, 6 o'clock tonight, Friday night, we'll be going live stream to talk about these issues and anything else that's on your mind for the next little while. We like to keep that dialogue going back and forth. That's one of the reasons we started doing this podcast. So we'll talk to you for the live stream later on tonight. Until then, I'm Bill Kelly. Stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.